biggest challenges you faced and you had to deal with over this process? We see that the benefits are valued and they're worth the effort, but what were the biggest challenges that you had to deal with?
Should I start on that one? Because I'd say it's communication, getting the message across without coming across that everyone else is useless and hopeless and you all need to get up to speed with the rest of us. That is not the message, but it can easily be misinterpreted. You want us all to have a degree now, do you? Why? What's wrong with what I'm doing? Are you saying I'm not very good at my job? Those are the sort of the kickback messages that came across. And we probably, in hindsight, didn't spend enough time selling what we were trying to achieve, and we were too quick to come up with the solution without showing the workings out, if you like, from a mathematics point of view. And I think that's been an error, and I think even today there are a few people who are sort of die-hard resistors to, this job's all about practical hands-on. It's not about writing essays and so on. And you still get that. It's all about common sense and give me someone who's sort of street trained over anyone who's just come straight out of university. It's getting those messages across that it's not pushing one down and lifting one up. It's actually we're all in it together, and that there's a new way, possibly in the future, where we can all drive that forward. And we're not going to dismiss anybody in the paramedic world or nursing or in the police who haven't come through what I've come through, because you also are still learning from that fantastic experience. It's communication and getting the message across and making sure that everybody is all on the same page.
May I ask about the aspects of diversity? Because a big issue with the policing right now is the fear that might touch on some communities and prevent them coming to the police because they are not academically driven or similar.
Let me start with that one, Jen. Then under the graduation program of the graduate profession, prior to 20 years ago, we were a male-dominated white male, and today we have over 50% of the paramedic world is female. We still need to work on diversity. We do reasonably well in the city centres, in the big towns of Manchester, Birmingham, London. We do less well in the rural communities, but if we broke down the statistics of rural communities, it isn't that far off. It is still an ongoing piece of work. We certainly don't exclude anybody by race or creed, but we do encourage. And I suppose there is a higher level to come in if you're looking for people who have got A levels, but we're a broad group who want to have people who come with access programs and who can show experiential learning and draw people in, perhaps who've coming from other professions. They bring with them other talents. That's about marketing yourself well, that's about advertising well, that's about encouraging and having an open mind to it all. And perhaps people in the past thought, oh well, that's just for people of a certain group, and it's breaking that little cycle and getting people in from the whole of the communities that are involved.
Can I also just add to that? I think if you look at examples of some kind of European countries, so I think for example places like kind of Finland, Scandinavian countries, they've actually found by moving towards a graduate profession in policing that they've increased diversity, particularly again along gendered kind of lines. So they've increased the number of kind of female recruits through introducing graduate professions. And actually there's some suggestion, particularly BME communities, that having a degree is much more valued, and that's actually prevented people from kind of joining the police in the past. So, because they tend to go for kind of the medical or legal profession where they are kind of degree sort of graduate profession. So I think actually the argument about diversity, I think if you start to look at the evidence, I'm not sure that kind of stands up, but I think there is kind of challenges in that with different communities. But I think the important thing about that is if you look at itchy eyes, and part of this is the development of the relationship with itchy eyes, there's a real strength in a number of itchy eyes who will be involved in delivering these kind of police degrees, who actually have a lot of skills in ensuring that they have a diverse range of students and that they support those students, particularly if you look at a number of universities, they have widening participation programmes that encourages and brings students in from different communities. So I don't see why the policing degree process would be any different from that.
Yeah.
So I think it's just thinking about also that's what universities can actually provide to support increasing that diversity, because they have a lot of skills and experience in doing that and meeting that agenda.
You're absolutely right. I mean, going back to the sort of original question.
Yes, the challenges.
The challenges, and I'd absolutely agree with Bob. I mean, I think it is about the way in which you communicate, the way in which you get that message across. So, one of the most difficult jobs that I ever had was when I was early in education, where Project 2000 was being implemented, and it was badged as this, people in the future will be knowledgeable doers. And some of the messages that came across within that policy and within that educational change really were not taken very well by the existing workforce, and so the existing workforce felt a bit devalued.
Yes.
We didn't get that piece right. Actually then there were further iterations of the curriculum that moved on from there, which actually swung the pendulum back a little bit. So when we moved into academia, everybody argued it's all too theoretical, it's not practical enough.
Yes.
And so of course you swing one way, then you swing back a little bit, and you probably get to where you need to be. So the next iteration, which was the fitness to practice curriculum, so-called, was a much easier sell to the profession actually, because people could see that it was really appealing, if you like, sort of traditional routes, but also very much professionalising. What's quite interesting about nursing, and I think it is quite unique to the other allied health professions, is we constantly have to justify why we have a degree as our preparation, constantly. And so, and that always comes to the fore at a time of crisis. So I would argue we have a crisis at the moment in the NHS in England, with 45,000 nurses short.
Yeah.
We're continually going overseas to bring nurses from Europe and outside of Europe to come and work in the NHS. And yet we still have 45,000 vacancies. And when you get that, then you will get a political pressure in the system to say, well, surely anybody could be a nurse, as long as you're kind and caring and compassionate. Well, you do have to be kind and caring and compassionate, but you have to know your stuff, and you have to be able to justify the actions that you take, and you have to be able to make the right call in very critical moments. Paramedics have to do exactly the same. That moment when they make that decision about leaving somebody at home, or when they decide actually we need to intervene here, or we need to do something else, or to work through another clinical protocol. Really, really important, because if you get that wrong, it can be disastrous. And so I think there is this constant pressure upon us to be able to justify why it is. And yet there is, as I said earlier, that wealth of evidence that says having a graduate, being educated to a graduate level enables you to actually perform much, much better and get much better outcomes.
Yeah. I think it's quite interesting, again, you mentioned Scandinavia and the increase in the numbers. I have had some experience of working at universities in Scandinavia, particularly in Finland, because we have a reciprocal partnership with them through our university, and actually they find for their vocational degrees, so we're talking prison officers, police, for around about sort of 80 places a year, they have about 8,000 applications. Wow. So the number of applications, people actually wanting to enter the profession, wow. There's a high volume. So, and I think as well, going back to the communication point, I think that's really kind of important about one of the challenges, because I think if you think about that and you connect that to kind of diversity, actually, if you really think about the degree apprenticeships that's coming online in terms of policing, it's also work-based learning. It's just not academic. It's actually kind of theory and practice, and actually, it's given people who potentially wouldn't have even thought about doing a degree before an opportunity to gain a qualification from an occupation they might have already wanted to go in. But what we're doing is we're just validating their experience, we're validating their knowledge, we're validating their skills by giving them something for themselves that they wouldn't have previously got. And I think people have to communicate or think about the degree in a different way. I think it's people say, oh, a degree for policing, you don't need that, it's just common sense, but actually you're in some ways you're devaluing the people who are potentially, you know, wanting to come into the profession, and all you're doing is actually just giving them something to demonstrate the work that they've done, what they've learned, the knowledge that they've gained, you know, and really actually kind of supporting them and probably investing in them, making them feel invested in. So I think it is hugely about that communication and how that is communicated, and I'm not sure really in policing that actually that's been achieved very well. I think we have to kind of rethink about it, and that's why I think this panel is really useful, because it's actually thinking about how we communicate that message and what the value of it actually is.
This is an incredibly important point, because a more recent challenge for nursing and indeed other allied health professions, and interestingly paramedic science is not part of this group of professions, the removal of the bursary and that central government funding for people to come to university and do their degree. That went, so now if you want to do nursing or you want to do physiotherapy, what have you, you actually have to go and get a student loan, you have to pay for your fees, you have to pay for your living expenses, etc., etc. That has had an enormous impact actually on the widening participation issues. So whereas in the past we would have had a number of what we would call mature students coming into the nursing profession, i.e. they've had a family, they're ready now to step on and move into that, they're being put off now because they see it as a debt that they can't take on. And so we have responded with degree apprenticeships. So whilst we are being challenged in one area around widening participation, we're opening up other opportunities elsewhere. And what we've now started to see is through the degree apprenticeship route, we're now recruiting those people who are not coming onto the full-time degree. They're both work-based learning, they both have their practice base, because you've got to do that in order to meet the competencies and proficiencies to register, but they're funded in very different ways. And I think what we might also see is a growth in that, with perhaps even the reduction in the fee that's possibly down the line in the Augur Review, which is due to be published probably next month or so. So it's interesting times actually. Yeah.